Welcome to Talking Kootenay Books. My name is Keith Powell, and today I have with me a Nelson author, Becky Livingston. Welcome, Becky. Great to have you on the show.
Thank you for asking me.
You know, I've invited you here to talk about your new book, and it's called Suitcase in the Jar. And it's a very personal story, and I just wanted you to tell us what prompted you to write this book.
Well, the subtitle of the book, Travels with a Daughter's Ashes, is basically, it's a personal story about me taking my daughter's ashes around the world for 26 months. And I didn't think I was going to write a book when I was traveling. I did a blog, but I didn't do a book. I had a friend, actually a Nelson author, who said to me, you have to write a memoir about this. And I said, oh, I can't do that. And she said, no, only you know where you left her and why you left her, where you left her. And that is a really interesting story.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about that story. And I'm sorry for the tragedy about your daughter. Let's just maybe go back to that point, and you can tell us how that all developed.
Yeah, my daughter Rachel was 15 when she was diagnosed with a brain tumor, and she died when she was 23. So it was almost 8 years of, you know, a couple of operations, radiation, chemotherapy, the whole thing. But she was actually very well. She traveled a lot. It was only in the last few months of her life that her body failed her. And it was the question that her father asked her in her dying days, which is, how about your mum and I take your ashes with us whenever we go traveling? And she nodded. So it was kind of this permission. And 18 months after she died, and life was pretty brutal, I said, okay, I'm out of here. And I went away for what I thought would be a year, and then I ended up being gone for 26 months.
Okay, so where did you travel to?
Oh, I started off in Spain. I went to Switzerland. I've got family in England, so I was there. I was in Western Australia, Tasmania, India, Ireland. And then the second year, when I was back in North America, I was down in California, in New York. When Hurricane Sandy was there, I was there during all of that. And then a lot around the Pacific Northwest.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this turned into like a tribute to your daughter, huh?
Well, you know, that's a good question that you say that, because what I realized is it became a ritual for me.
Okay.
And of course, rituals sort of help restore order.
Okay.
And that's what it helped me do. And so my leaving my daughter's ashes everywhere I went became this kind of ritual. So it was, you know, I was homeless and she was kind of homeless, so we found homes for each other.
I see.
During those 26 months.
What was the reaction that people had when you sort of told them or shared this story?
Well, when I was traveling, I didn't tell people what I was doing. It was very, very private, and I didn't want people to be saying, well, you be doing that. I don't know if that. It was something I was doing very quietly and privately. There were very few people I told. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So then you came back to Nelson, which is home, right?
Well, actually, it was Vancouver.
Okay.
I lived and worked in Vancouver for years.
So back to Vancouver.
Yep.
What was the process then to actually start to write this down?
Right. So when I decided that my friend was absolutely right and I did need to write about this, I thought, well, okay, now how do I do that?
Right.
So I had a wonderful mentor, Betsy Warland, who started the Writer's Studio at Simon Fraser University.
Okay.
And so I registered in Vancouver Manuscript Intensive. I did loads of reading of memoir and lots of courses and with other people, talking with other people, and it came together, and then I got an agent and I got a publisher. You
mentioned it allowed you to explore your grief.
Yes.
Can you just expand on that? How did it help you cope?
Well, I think, well, as I mentioned about the ritual and what became that, but I also think that because Rachel was a traveler and she wanted to keep traveling and couldn't, and I could do that for her, there was a lot of that was a fabulous thing to be able to kind of do that for her in some ways. But it's also, I find that when you travel, there's this very much this parallel between travel and grief, because you don't really belong anywhere. You're in this sort of no man's land, and I kind of just wanted to continue on this state of real sort of groundlessness and not knowing and uncertainty, and that really helped me a lot.
So what do you think your daughter would have thought of the book?
I think she'd be so proud of me. Yeah. She would. She would. Yeah,
good.
yeah.
And what about the rest of your family? Any feedback from them?
Yeah, I mean, my daughter, so now I have one daughter, one living daughter, Charlotte, who lives in the West Kootenays, which is why I've moved to the West Kootenays, so I can be close to her and her children now. And she's just super proud. I mean, you know, it is kind of a legacy that I've left to her and to both of my daughters, really, and to life, a renewal when you think, you know, things can't get any worse, and then but you can actually experience joy. Actually, ultimately, that's what I realised, which surprised me. But there you go. Good. Yeah.
So I know you've been out promoting the book and talking about the book and interacting with a number of people in the Kootenays and I think beyond.
Right.
What's that process been like, and why is it important for you to tell that story?
Yeah, well, you know, when I was writing it, I never thought, oh, I wonder who's going to read this. I was very much focused on coming out with the best book I could write. When it was done, when I got the publisher, I suddenly thought, whoa, I got to get people to read this now, you know. And so I had to just sort of switch gears completely and go, okay, how do you go about marketing a book? So I did a lot of work with some people and sort of changed direction. It's a very, very different experience to the solitude of just writing. But it's great, you know, I've been invited to go up to the Whistler Writers Festival and talk at a symposium in Vancouver. Who knew, right? I had no idea. I'm actually very surprised. But what I really love is that people often come up to me at the end of an evening and they'll share a story with me. And that's very touching. I hadn't quite...
Sort of hadn't anticipated that?
I hadn't. But of course I probably should have, but I hadn't. And so, you know, it's a very, you know, you've got the adrenaline of having shared a book, and then you've got this very personal moment of somebody sharing. Often when they want you to make it out to somebody, when you write, you sign your book, that's usually when they tell a story, and it's,
So you've almost given them a license to talk about their own experience or grief?
Exactly. Yeah, so true, yeah.
So just before we wrap it up, I just wanted to explore the actual writing process. How long did it take you to write the book?
Oh, I would say pretty much 3 years, full on. Had a little part-time job 2 days a week, but that's pretty much all I did. And then, you know, edits, as you know, which take huge chunks of time as well. And then, you know, the whole process of agents and publishing and all that. And a little bit from my travels and my blog. I used little bits of that, but yeah, 3-4 years it was.
Okay, so the name of the book again?
It's called The Suitcase and the Jar, Travels with the Daughter's Ashes.
Good. Thank you, Becky. We really appreciate you being a guest on Talking Kootenay Books.
Thank you.
My name is Keith Powell, and this has been Talking Kootenay Books. Welcome to Talking Kootenay Books. My name is Keith Powell. I'm really pleased to have Pat Morrow with us today. Pat is a legendary adventurer, photographer, climber. It's really great to have you on the program today, Pat.
Thank you. Thank you.
Particularly impressed with your new book here, Searching for Teo Canyon. Let's just talk about that, when it came out, and sort of the inspiration behind it. So, could you just tell me, first of all, when did you do this incredible amount of photography?
I went down from Kimberley, where I was living at the time in the mid-70s, with Art Toomey, my mentor in photography and climbing and adventuring. And we went down in the mid-70s to the desert in Arizona and Utah. Art had already spent a fair amount of time down there hiking and climbing and photographing. So the idea was to go down and check out the potential for doing some more photographic work. And when I got down there, I realized the landscape is the most exotic we have here in North America. You know, like it's basically world-class, totally different than anything we will ever see around here. So that was a super inspiration to continue going down every year for 10 years with Art, and also with a writer, photographer friend by the name of Jeremy Schmidt from the States. And so yeah, we collected the imagery, 40 between 30 and 40 years ago. And the book only came out last year.
Right.
It had a long gestation period, you could say. And Rocky Mountain Books was the publisher, and they had the audacity to bring out a book that had sat on the shelf for so long. But I think they're really pleased with it, and certainly we are.
Right. Well, the photography is incredible, and the story itself is pretty incredible as well, because in fact you somewhat invented a new adventure sport, did you not?
Well, we were in the vanguard of canyoneering, and at the time, out of all the time we spent down there, we never saw another soul out in the canyons, and let alone with camera gear like we were photographing. And so we just basically, being climbers and mountaineers, we adapted our climbing techniques and combined them with caving techniques, which means, you know, lowering ourselves down into these slot canyons, some of which are 200 meters deep, you know, like some of them are very deep. And so we needed to know how to get back out with Jumar clamps and that kind of technique. Also, the way the slot canyons are formed in the soft sandstone is through flash floods. So we learned real fast not to be down there during a flash flood.
Right. What kind of geographical area are we talking about?
It's technically it's the Colorado Plateau, but it's in northern Arizona, near where the Grand Canyon is, and southern Utah. So in that general area. It's a huge area.
Right.
Yeah, and there's thousands of canyons.
So did you explore a lot of it or concentrate on one area?
Well, we were attracted to a couple of canyons that were very handy to the road at first, and it turns out after all those years of exploration that they had some of the nicest formations to photograph. But the book has about 30 different canyons in it.
Okay.
So some of them are very remote, and they're on the Navajo reservation, which is out of bounds now to tourists in general, just because of a lot of ecological damage that's been done over the years, but people four-wheeling and stuff like that.
Right.
So some of these pictures are taken in a very popular canyon called Antelope Canyon, which has become pretty much world famous now. It's been commercialized, and up to 2,500 people a day cycle through that one little canyon.
So just talk about again, the actual canyon itself.
Yep.
What makes, the pictures are spectacular.
Yep.
It captures the light and the color. But what makes those canyons so unique?
Well, for us, living here in our environment, especially through long Canadian winters, which are pretty bleak, and pretty stark colors like black, white, and gray. You go down there, and all of a sudden you're into warm oranges and reds and yellows, and so immediately the colors are very attractive. But also the way the sandstone has been carved by the flash flooding and by erosion, like sand pouring down for centuries. And they have created in certain formations, not everywhere, but in certain formations, like the Navajo sandstone especially, these beautifully carved flutings of shapes.
Did you have a favorite time when you would go in and maybe catch the light just right?
Yeah, actually, photographing in the canyons is totally different than, say, photographing on the surface of the desert or here in the mountains, because often where the camera is down at the bottom of the canyon, the light can't penetrate down there directly, and when it does, when it comes directly overhead, it's often too harsh. So we relied on reflected light, so it would come down and bounce off the walls and give you these rich glowing colors, which you see in the photographs.
So something unique that really struck me with your book is I think that was the era of film, if I'm not mistaken. And we take digital photography for granted these days. Everyone has a camera on their phone and so forth. How was it different to work with the medium of film?
Well, the sharpest film that we had available was called Kodachrome 25, and it was a slide film. And it was very insensitive to light. Like if you're on the desert surface, you could take pictures handheld in in broad daylight, no problem. But when you go down there, the amount of light forces you to use very slow shutter speed, sometimes up to 3-4 minutes.
Right.
And so, and you could never see your result right away, like you can with digital. Last spring, I went back down to a couple of those canyons with a modern day camera, and I was able to hand hold at a 15th of a second in one of the alcoves where I'd photographed before on a tripod.
Right.
And the results were darn close.
Right.
So, I mean, these days, digital photography, almost anything you can see, you can photograph,
Right.
you know. But in the old days, you were very limited with your.
You actually had to be a really good photographer.
Well, it turned us into that, and it also gave us training for other difficult types of photography in other parts of the world. Now, all three of us were just starting out on our photography and adventure journalism careers then, and everything we learned down there about how to stay safe when we're climbing and canyoneering, and also how to take pictures under duress, and sometimes super hot temperatures, sometimes quite cold, you know, wading up to your chest in ice cold water, for instance, trying to keep your camera alive and yourself from getting hypothermia. Everything we learned down there, we basically could apply.
Right. So it was a real learning experience for you as well.
Yeah.
So you had two other collaborators on the book. Let's just talk about them for a moment.
Yeah.
So Art Toomey, a name that's well known in the Kootenays here.
Yeah.
And you mentioned him as your mentor, I believe.
Yeah.
So let's just talk a little bit about Art.
Yeah, sure. Well, when Art came up to this part of the world from the States, he was a conscientious objector from the Vietnam War era. And many of the people who came up over the border in those days were intellectuals who were driven out of their own country by the thought that innocent villagers were being napalmed in Vietnam. And what they brought with them was a sensibility and an education that formed the basis of conservation efforts in this part of our country. And in his case, Art and John Brzezinski, who were friends that came up together, mobilized people on both sides of the Purcells in the Rocky Mountain Trench and in the West Kootenays to pressure the government into forming the Purcell Wilderness Conservancy. Right. The first of its kind in BC, and still by far the largest of its kind in BC.
So real legacy there.
Yeah, and so that influenced me, not just me, but many of us here in the Kootenays. And the other thing that I appreciated about Art was that he really, he was a true dirtbag climber in that he.
So tell us what that means.
Okay, dirtbag means in the context of adventure, the venture world, is that you maximize the amount of experience out in a remote place like the canyons or up on a high mountain in the Himalaya or in the Andes, and on a shoestring budget. Right. And you do it in very good style because you have to have much better climbing technique and much better survival skills to do some of these projects without any budget, with zero budget. Right. And so that tradition is looked fondly upon here in the Kootenays, and in Kimberley for sure. There's a dirtbag festival every year, and everyone pretends to be a dirtbag athlete, but really we're all yuppie, wannabes. And but mostly, I mean, there's still a few of us that are able to carry on the tradition in its strictest sense. Right. And certainly in those days, a lot of people had peer pressure from their parents or their friends to follow a traditional trajectory into an occupation of some kind, and I could see that Art was living up in the Purcell Wilderness area, up to St. Mary's, and able to lead a really rich life as a freelance photographer. Sure. And so I basically paid attention to what his approach, and it worked out for me.
So you literally followed in his footsteps to some
literally.
degree.
Yeah.
So how much did he contribute to the book?
Okay, well, the book, it was a total collaborative project, and we agreed from the beginning that we would not share credits in there. We would just put the pictures in, and so you won't see our names on the pictures, so you won't know how many pictures each of us took, but or had in there, but each of us had roughly a third of the book. There's like 120, 130 pictures maybe. And so we did about a third of that. And the other thing I'd like to point out is that this was many years before the days of Instagram. And we had a policy when we had our photos published in magazines. Like we had a nice spread in one of the first issues of Outside magazine. Of our canyon pictures. We put pseudonyms on the pictures, on the captions, and the name Tao Canyon is a pseudonym. There's no canyon down there called Tao Canyon. There's 30 different canyons in that book. All of them are Tao Canyon, and we can see now the wisdom behind that.
So what is the rationale behind that?
Well, because by pinpointing where these special places are, not just in the canyons, but anywhere in the world, we're actually attracting crowds of people that are loving these places to death. And in the case of the canyons, it's a lot of the sandstone is very, very brittle, and when you step on it with hiking boot Vibram soles, you break the flutings, and also you leave big black marks from your boots. So, and in the case of some of the places, they became party places. You know, like people discovered them and you know, just left their trash.
So is there some protection for those?
There is some in some areas, but regrettably, the Trump administration is starting to lift the protection, or he's trying to have it lifted from a vast part of that world to let mining interests and oil and gas in there. So there's a lot of resistance, and hopefully this administration isn't going to be around for another term, and hopefully it's going to remain protected. Because
it's a pretty special place.
It's unique in the world. You know, I've kind of hunted for slot canyons in other parts of the world, and frankly, the American Southwest is the only place in the world where it's so concentrated and so many canyons.
So let's just talk a little bit, Pat, about your life in adventure. So you've done some amazing things: 7 summits, Mount Everest, and so forth. Born and raised in Kimberley, is that correct?
Born in Invermere, raised in Kimberley. Yeah.
So just tell me about your local experience, sort of what inspired you to take on that sort of life of adventure.
Well, I thought I wanted to be a newspaper photographer, and I did work for the Kimberley Bulletin newspaper for my high school years, you know, at night and on weekends. And then I went and studied journalism in Calgary and worked for the Herald for a year, and found out that I had no life in the city or in the town, you know, going out every day looking for photographs. And through Art's example, you know, he was taking pictures for magazines and book publishers around the world. That gave me the idea to go down to where the marketplace was in New York City and knock on doors, you know, and in those days you could, you know, like you could go and have a coffee or lunch with the editor of Life magazine, you know, or Time magazine, or even in Washington D.C. in National Geographic. So by doing that, I also met other photographers and writers that were down there doing the same thing, and when you meet other people with big dreams about seeing the world and paying for it through, you know, sales of your work, then you kind of feed off of each other. And when you see other people's work, whether it's on TV or in books or in magazines, it gives you ideas about places you'd like to see,
Right.
and on your own terms, go there. And someone might have gone on a cruise on the Danube. Well, I would like to go there and do a story on, the making of, I don't know, wine in the vineyard,
Right.
in the picture behind, or something like
Right.
that. Like the culture.
So you want to tell the story more than...
Yeah. And what right now the whole climate for being a freelancer has changed since digital came in around 2000, and so in order to make a living at this, today's photographer would have a very difficult time.
Right. So you were in the right ear at the right time.
Yeah. I was very, very lucky. And I worked with my wife, Baiba. We were a team. We worked for 30 years, basically traveling the world and doing shoots for Equinox magazine,
Right.
and then selling stories to magazines all over the world.
Right. So you've explored the entire world. I would have to think. Is there any area that you haven't been to that you'd like to go to?
I think Mongolia is up there on the tick list. And
What are some of your most recent adventures?
Bob and I were trekking in the highlands of Ethiopia last winter, and we were there just to see for ourselves what it was like, because we had seen some very nice films and also stories about the highlands and the wildlife, and also the Ethiopian people.
Right.
And so we were there just for a personal project.
Right. Sounds neat. So let's just go back to the book again.
Yep.
What's the reaction been?
We're really pleased. We've given a slideshow at the Banff Mountain Book Fest and in the Vancouver International Mountain Festival, and various other places down in Montreal and Ottawa. And people have received the book very well, and we're really pleased about it. It's an evergreen topic, and we're really pleased at how well the imagery has stood up all these years.
Right.
We've now there's quite a few books out on the Canyon country, but still I think we have something to offer in terms of the freshness of the imagery, and also the message that's in the book, and that is to please look after these places.
Right.
And
There's a lot of special places, but they're...
And don't geotag it in your Instagram feed.
Right.
And today, a lot of people are paying attention, and they're not. They're putting up pictures on their social media, and they're being careful not to.
Right.
Great.
Well, it's great to have you as a guest.
Great. Well, thank you
I appreciate
so much.
it. So the book is Searching for Teo Canyon, and it's available at local bookstores.
Yeah, Huckleberry Books in Cranbrook, and also in the bookstore in Kimberley. It's there. And
Super. A tremendous collection of photographs, and a great job. Thank you again for being our guest.
Okay, thank you very much.
This is Keith Powell, and this has been Talking Kootenay Books.